you don't know me, I'm Louise Lawson. I'm part of the Icon Contemporary Art Network, and I'm moderating this first session. So I just want to thank you all for signing up to attend Getting Started in Contemporary Art, which has been hosted by Icon's Contemporary Art Network with the Emerging Professional Network. And I do want to just thank the amazing network committee of Amy, Alice, Brian and Deborah, and particularly Amy and Alice, who are helping us navigate the world of Zoom. I also wanted to extend my thanks to Libby Island and the whole of the Emerging Professional Network Committee too. And we're going to start this morning with a short welcome from James Grayson, one of Icon's trustees, and then it will be back to me for some housekeeping before we then start with the presentations. James?
Good morning. Thank you, Louise, and good morning, everybody. Our Chief Executive, Sarah Crofts, wasn't able to make it here this morning, so it falls on me to welcome you all here to the first joint conference held by the Contemporary Art Network and the Emerging Professionals Network. This is, as I understand, the second event that the Contemporary Art Network have held, but its first digital one. The network was established a couple of years ago in recognition of the very particular issues related to the conservation of contemporary art. You know, the fact that it deals often with the works by living artists, that it includes time-based media, and the sheer variety and span of the media and materials that are involved. Now, I also know that there's a healthy split between members working in institutions and in private practice, each sort of enriching the other's experience. I'm told that there are now over 140 people registered for this conference, and you're going to be hearing over today and the next 2 days from 13 separate speakers. And the program looks, even to a layman like me, just like an exceptionally interesting series of talks. So there's a lot to look forward to, I think. Icon, of course, is a product of its membership, and some of you will have heard me say before how impressed I've been at the way that Icon members and also the staff, how well people have risen to the many challenges that we've all faced over the last 9 months. And one of the most obvious manifestations of that has been what became known as the Conservation Together at Home series, which built enthusiastically and very quickly on the back of the webinars instigated by the Book and Paper Group. And now I've been a bit nerdy about this. I've worked out that we've actually had 166 working days since lockdown began in March. And in that time, there have been 53 online events, webinars, conferences. That's roughly one every 3 days, which is just an incredibly impressive number when you reflect both that it happened pretty much from a standing start and what it signals, which I think is a determination to stay positive and to maintain career momentum at a difficult and uncertain time. A deep belief, passionate belief in professional standards and the need to continually invest in knowledge and capabilities. It's a recognition also of the value of the Icon network in terms of the incredible array of skills available to draw on, and an understanding too that the Icon membership also exists as a more generally supportive community in which members are willing and able to help each other. So I can predict that over the course of this conference, you're going to see expertise, resourcefulness, determination, along with a passionate conviction about cultural heritage. Once again, a blend of professional care, sort of steely career focus, and pure altruism, which I think reflects wonderfully on the Icon community. And I'm in the midst of a blizzard of Zoom meetings this week, unfortunately, so I won't be able to stay with you now, but I do hope to be able to sneak in quietly over the next couple of days in gaps between meetings. So I'm going to leave you confident with the wish that you will all have an enjoyable and enriching conference, and hand you back to Louise now. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, James. That was such a wonderful welcome, and I really appreciate your time this morning.
Pleasure.
So I just wanted to start with some basic housekeeping. So This is our first ever Zoom event. We're all fairly nervous, the committee and the speakers, so please do bear with us if anything goes wrong technically. We're very new to this. So after each presentation, we're going to have time for a few questions, and we'll have time for more questions at the end of the session. So can I just ask everyone to use the Q&A function for questions, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you want to chat or comment, just use the chat function. So if you want to just make a comment about what you're hearing, please do that. But if the questions can come in the Q&A, that will help us separate that out, and we would really appreciate lots of questions, because obviously this is very different. Unfortunately, I can't see anyone, so I'm just hoping we'll have lots of questions come through after each presentation. I also wanted to say in this first session we have 2 pre-recorded talks. Unfortunately, 2 of our speakers weren't able to make this morning, but they have very kindly spent time to pre-record their sessions, which is just fantastic of them. So what I'd like to do is basically kick off and introduce our first 2 speakers, who are Julia Nagel and Alice Craigie. Julia is a fellow of the International Institute of Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, and Julia has worked at Tate, English Heritage and UCL, in addition to many years at the Hamilton Kerr Institute. She opened up her own studio in 2009, one of the few in London recognised for its specialist expertise in modern and contemporary conservation. Julia is an ICON accredited conservator and an assessor for professional accreditation of conservation professionals across all disciplines. And Alice initially studied fine art at Newcastle University before joining the postgraduate course in the conservation of easel paintings at the Courtauld Institute. And after completing her conservation studies in 2019, Alice became a full-time graduate intern at Julia Nagel Conservation, where she has recently been promoted to assistant conservator for a further year. So I would like to hand over to them so they can talk through what they have learned in terms of a graduate internship.
Just bear with us while we're sharing the screen. Sorry everyone, first technical glitch. I'll start off a little bit while Alice is doing her technical wizardry over here. So just like to welcome everyone, say good morning. Thank you very much for having us. I'm going to start by giving you a brief introduction to our internship programme, and then I'll hand over to Alice, who will then further illustrate what's happened. I'm really sorry, but it's asking us to quit and start again. We have been. We can't do.
No, it's needs the system preferences to do it. Can we open it on yours?
No.
No. Sorry about this.
This is not on the presenter one.
Shall I do that and start it again?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we not? No.
Just as. Oh.
There we go. Well done. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Well done, Alice. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction and then I'll hand over to Alice. We've had to omit some of the... We've had to omit artwork details specifically because to maintain our client confidentiality. So unfortunately, restoration is often perceived as really negative in the contemporary art market, as the collectors really want artworks to be in pristine condition and untouched. Dissemination is therefore quite a tricky balancing act for us, but we do believe it's really important both for the artworks and for our profession that we do whatever we can to share. We also recognise that we rely heavily on institutions openly sharing their research into new methods and materials. So this is really, I think, right and fair. I also just wanted to make a mention, talking of fairness, about diversity in conservation, which we all recognise, I think, as being very lacking at the moment. And I think having work experience placements and internships is one way that we can really help to increase diversity in all of the arts and conservation eventually. And I've done that through these two organisations that you can see on the screen here. Very welcome to email me later if anyone wants more information about those. But these two support young people from different backgrounds who are interested in working in the arts but may not know about all the varied roles that are available. Clearly they don't work on paintings when they come to us because they're not qualified to, but there's all sorts of things they can do. So they've carried out research into pigments, painted out various samples, different paints, and helped make mock-ups or document complex treatments. It's enough to expose them to some different options, and it really helps with their CVs. So I would encourage people to look into these. Conversely, we've also now set up a whole year-long graduate internship for recently qualified conservators who have a keen interest in modern and contemporary art conservation and want to learn more. So Alice is our first full-time year-long internship, and she set the bar very high, as you'll see. On this side, on the right-hand side, you can see a list of an overview of some of the roles and responsibilities of our graduate intern. Practical treatments, as you can see, come quite low down on that list, and that's because our projects often require extensive research and testing, while treatment time itself can be relatively really brief. Naturally, we, like others, build on our experience, but procedures are rarely repeated in exactly the same way twice. Also, delicate, unvarnished surfaces are extremely prone to irreparable damage, such as polishing or staining during treatment. And in my view, they're unsuitable for practicing on. Plus, we have a responsibility to our clients, of course. Requests for placement, sadly, are commonly really at odds with this, asking for students to hone their practical skills or carry out bench work to supplement academic studies while they're with us. As you can see from the list on the slide, our interns do put their theoretical studies into practice in many different ways, and they certainly learn how a modern art conservator fits into the commercial art world. They also experience working in a wide variety of environments, including art fairs, commercial and public galleries, private homes, and of course the conservation studio. Hosting interns is a time-consuming process initially, hence setting up the graduate internship for a whole year, but it can also be extremely rewarding for both parties and financially viable if the match is right. It's essential that our graduate intern has a proven interest in modern and contemporary art and that they have completed a recognised course in conservation, but we don't expect them to be experts yet, and we don't expect them to be quick. I'm now going to hand over to Alice, who will illustrate some of what she's learned during her time with us so far.
Thank you. So as Julia has introduced, my role and responsibilities as graduate intern have been nuanced and varied. It's been a fantastic experience post-training, immersing myself in all aspects of a busy commercial studio, and there have been many highlights and learning curves. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I can't share everything, but I've selected a few key insights which I've framed around concerns which I feel are particularly pertinent to modern and contemporary conservation. So firstly, when it comes to assessing a modern and contemporary work, a key question may be concerned with the artwork's materiality. What exactly is the artwork comprised of? They often incorporate unconventional, unfamiliar, or even unidentified materials. Examples I've seen include carnival fabric, reflector fabric, mirrors, spray paint, silicone, Rolletex house paint, organic and perishable materials, which you can think of famously as the elephant dung on the Ophelia works, in addition to perhaps more typical modern and contemporary materials such as acrylic paint, graphite, and charcoal. It's important to gain as much information as possible to help inform testing and potential treatment avenues. This is initially done through close examination and scrutiny of the surface, but often involves liaising with gallery staff, technicians, registrars, or even the artist or fabricator themselves. As modern and contemporary works can encompass such a broad spectrum of materials, there is often the need for cross-discipline collaboration. An artwork might have the format of a painting, but the materials that it is made of may be more in line with another specialism. During my internship, I've worked with textiles, paper, and plastic conservators, as well as conservation scientists, to establish the best course for treatment. A key part of understanding the materiality is also understanding what is inherent to the work. As we are often assessing or treating young works, or even those that have come direct from the studio, we may be the first to intervene after the artists themselves. This gives us a unique and privileged position to understand what is inherent to the artist's visual language, working method, the studio environment, and sometimes to document the artist's own reworking, repairs, and retouching. Examples that I've recorded include variations in matte and gloss, oil drips, scuffs, dust and dirt, flies stuck in the paint, and intentional cracking. In the same vein, it is worth noting that some very fresh works are still drying, and you can expect a degree of change to occur with works that are still in the process of curing. This is one of the reasons why we keep retouching to a minimum. The detail of the oil drip I've included in the lower centre will have darkened as it's aged, but it is also still sticky and soft to the touch. We frequently see the repeated problem of wrapping stuck to the surface because the painting is still wet or sticky, and this can imprint or flatten passages and cause serious permanent damage. The top central and right images are details of work I examined. It was challenging to understand what soil, debris, dust, and dirt was inherent and originated from the studio, as it was clear that the artwork had been exposed to an outdoor environment during or very early on in its creation. This needed to be considered carefully before recommending dusting, as it seemed part of the dirt was intended. What's more, the silicone glue had in points been smeared on by hand, and you could see the smudges caused by handprints all over the surface, which I hope you can see in the top centre image. Again, this could be misinterpreted as poor handling and a later accumulation if not documented at the outset. Here are two details of works by the Brazilian artist Adriana Barajal. On the left is an example of her paintings of ceramic tiles, and the images have been sourced from her website. She deliberately exploited the materials so that they crack in this work. However, on the right is a detail of a painting depicting a room of tiles, also by Barajal. However, this has developed cracks that are not intentional and disrupt the composition and illusion and depth of space. This goes to highlight that there can be discrepancies with intention even within an artist's body of work. There are many ways the reading of a contemporary artwork can be compromised. These come in the form of, though not exclusively to, relatively minor scuffs, a loss, cracks, handling marks, aqueous splashes or drips, polished areas, or a change in surface gloss. What may ordinarily be perceived as a minor damage can, on particular modern contemporary works, be considered major and be highly distracting. Imagine, for example, a colour field painting with crossbar marks, or a minimalist work with alkyd priming that's now exhibiting large crack patterns. So preventative measures such as bespoke backboards are also a key part of what we do and champion, as a timely intervention can make a big difference. It's also maybe worth highlighting that handling marks do not present for a few years after the event, so even if an artwork has been documented as being in perfect condition, it may well still be inevitable that cracks will develop later. It's extremely helpful to try to gain as best possible an understanding of how artworks are intended to be read. Interviews such as those on the Menil collection are very useful resources, alongside online videos, artist webinars, statements, and it's genuinely amazing how much you can find through a simple Google search, perhaps even the work itself being made in the studio. All of this can prove very informative for understanding materials, techniques, and intention. Of course, the best circumstance is if you can communicate with the artist yourself, and working with living artists is a huge privilege. But from a conservation perspective, you may also have to take into account the views of the artist, some of whom explicitly state their views about future care, or who may still own the works being treated. Sometimes artists may have a particular interest in the conservation and will visit the studio, or seek conservation themselves. This image is of Cecilia Vicuña, a Chilean artist who was visiting our studio, and it's also a lovely example of a project where we consulted an artist. This work was comprised of 6 double-sided canvas screens, stretched on strainers and hinged in pairs. The treatment included complex cleaning, structural repairs, retouching, and presented a great opportunity for cross-discipline collaboration, as each of the Biombo panels had a ribbon pinned to the outside edge that in this particular instance functioned like a frame. A textile conservator came to work alongside us in the studio to treat the ribbon. What's also interesting to note is that living artists are often far more tolerant of change and aging, and sometimes even damage in their own works. It can also be surprising what an artist may have intended, and a real privilege of sometimes being able to form a relationship with the artist is the opportunity to learn more about their intention directly. So timing and time management has been a very big learning curve. Within the busy commercial studio, treatments have different time pressures and demands. Some works have a very rapid turnaround, such as treatments in preparation for the Frieze Art Fair, whereas others may have a much more protracted testing phase to ascertain if a particular avenue of treatment is even viable, and could therefore be in the studio for months. This image is from a video of a treatment we did at JNC in 2018. It was a large water-sensitive artwork that had suffered rain damage. The testing phase was incredibly lengthy and involved liaising with the artist, who came to the studio and even gave us a testing panel, so the majority of testing could be conducted away from the surface itself. I was involved in some of the preparation and in charge of directing the complex timing during the treatment. The treatment itself was conducted by 7 conservators in one day and involved the systematic placement of 22 sheets of agarose gel, and I've included a link below if you're curious. So personal time management is very important, not only because you may be juggling multiple responsibilities, but because while I was training, I was working towards projects and treatments with an overall deadline. In private practice, while that remains true, you are also required to keep on track with timings for each particular task. It was a different way of working to get used to, and it's been a very good learning curve. I should say that as an intern, I was allowed double the time of the experienced conservators. Working with the timesheet and reflecting on how long particular tasks have taken is an incredibly useful way of improving your ability in the future to make accurate estimates. And if you're training, I would recommend the beneficial practice of noting down how long you anticipate a task to take and then how long it actually took. Managing expectations works 2 ways, as you have to manage your own expectations as well as those of the client. This image is an example of an artwork that has the format of a painting, but is on reflector fabric and is in fact a type of plastic with glass. As you can see, the artwork has scattered losses along the edges, which are due to the material being tacky and having been soft wrapped in tissue. We tested a variety of approaches to retouch these losses, including dry methods such as pencils and iridescent pigments in a range of mediums. However, due to the inherent optical quality of the fabric, it was impossible to mimetically retouch. And just to highlight this further, the image on the right is actually the work taken in the dark. The mantra is less is more, and we had to settle with a very minimal toning of the losses that inevitably remain visible from different angles. It's an example of managing your own expectations of what's possible, as well as ensuring the client understands this in advance to agreeing to the treatment and the costs. And to further illustrate the point, I've included this quote by Christian Scheidemann, "Can you wash me without getting me wet?" which was in response to a client asking for some invisible retouching. Perhaps the high client demands for invisible intervention relate to this very low tolerance for signs of age and damage within modern contemporary works. Just also to note, as the artworks can have an unvarnished surface or incorporate an unusual material, the treatment often needs to utilise a different arsenal of materials. For instance, modern and contemporary works tend to be easier to treat than older works in terms of planar distortions because they tend to be more flexible. But on the flip side, surfaces are more sensitive. Magnetic bonbons, as seen on the right, are often employed in lieu of an appropriate conservational method for treating raised cracks on an extremely sensitive and friable surface. We engage with research conducted and shared by institutions, frequently using the modular cleaning program and adjusted water for dirt removal, cosmetic sponges or smoke sponges for dry cleaning, and the majority of retouching is conducted in water-based paints or dry methods where possible, which are generally non-toxic. Cool paints are frequently used, and these are pigments bound in Aquazol 200, but we also use pigments bound in methyl cellulose, triphenol, or Regal Res. Paranoid B72 or some of the more widely used resins for traditional paintings are generally unsuitable, as they would usually dissolve the original materials and not be reversible. And a real pleasure of retouching is the bright, colourful palette, and even though we couldn't use the iridescent pigments for the work shown previously, it was certainly fun to test them. I thought I'd come into land by discussing one of my main roles as graduate intern, which has been to undertake the key stage photography. So most of the works are unvarnished, which can in certain instances make photography easier. However, lots of subtle variables can impact the consistency of photography, such as where in the studio you are taking the photo, and even the time of day. The biggest challenge is sometimes documenting the treatment itself, as the visual change may be very subtle, and in some cases, it's more useful to show the used sponges or swabs than the clean surface. On the left is an example of a smoke sponge in front of the very light canvas which it was used to clean, and you wouldn't have expected it to yield so much dirt. In the centre is a detail of an artwork surface made of Rolletex house paint. Significant dirt was removed from the surface, however the inherent texture cast shadows, making the work seem grey. Furthermore, you may need to rely on high-res details when the work is large, as an overall image may not show subtle damage. Conversely, sometimes the treatment is tricky because you can't see the scuff or damage close up, or indeed dirt removal is so subtle on the surface, it is difficult to keep track of where you've cleaned. White balancing, colour matching, and calibration of before and after treatment images is challenging, particularly when documenting monochrome or colour-filled works, as any slight shift in tone, hue, or brightness needs to authentically match the treatment. While most works are unvarnished, sometimes we have surfaces that are highly reflective and glossy. This particular painting on the right functioned like a mirror, and it was almost impossible to get a good photo of the artwork without taking a selfie. Raking light and transmitted light are very useful tools for documenting treatments or particular damages, and in this case, a natural raking light and an acute angle were the best way of showing the damage, which compromised the drips of uncured resin that had oozed out from underlayers into the surface. And I hope you can see both of those, in both of these images, the drips that had come through. And just as a fun detail as well, I've included this of the image, the same painting. However, all the pink and the orange is actually reflected from another artwork that was in the background of the studio. And I think it serves to highlight just how difficult this surface was. Of course, I can't ignore the impact of COVID on my internship. I was based at home from March and unable to do any practical treatments until I returned to the studio in September. I thought I'd end my presentation here by sharing a few interesting, exciting, and free resources that helped me to continue to engage while I wasn't able to work. And you can see those links at the bottom of the screen. Of course, a big thank you to Julia and the wider team at JNC and all of you for listening. So I think we will be ready to take questions.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you, Julia and Alice. So we have some questions that have come through from our panelists, and hopefully that will generate more from our audience. So one question is, do you have, sorry, the screen just moved. Do you have any tips for photographing transparent or glossy artworks?
It is very challenging. I think we just utilise best what we can in the studio and often have some big black plasters to hand to try and minimise reflection or take it in quite low level lighting. But sometimes you can't. In that particular work I showed you, you kind of had to accept that there was always going to be a level of reflection in what we can achieve in the studio.
And I think as well, we don't always try and photograph things front on either, do we? Yeah. Sometimes you've actually got to move to the side, and I think also details are really useful and annotated diagrams.
Okay. The next question is, you've mentioned that artists can be very tolerant of change. Has this ever conflicted with your initial conservation treatment options that you might have put forward?
Gosh, that's a really big question, because now I'm just going through the archive of hundreds and hundreds of things that we've treated, and it's rather a large question to try and just answer off the cuff, I think. It's very unexpected sometimes, so it can be really unpredictable, and I think that's something. I mean, so for example, I'll give you an example of a Banksy work that we treated that was made of corrugated cardboard that Anna Cooper actually wrote up for the Picture Restorer many years ago. And given that it was made out of cardboard and was a standing figure, you'd think it was okay for it to have some sort of rough edges and not look pristine. And we worked with Banksy's representative, and that wasn't the case at all. He actually wanted it to look really pristine, and allowed us to replace certain parts of it that were quite badly damaged. So yeah, I would say it's unpredictable, definitely. Hope that helps.
And this is more of a straightforward question from Libby, who's in our audience. Was Alice still a student when she did the internship, and was it a paid internship? I guess it's interesting to know how that opportunity arose for others.
First came to us from the Courtauld while she was training, so I think between second and
I did a couple of weeks of sort of volunteering while I was on the course during my second and third year.
And then now it is absolutely a paid full-time position for a year for a fixed term. So yes, it is paid.
Great. And we've got lots of questions. Can you please explain more about the magnetic bonbons? Had several come through about that. So
the magnetic bonbons are just a way of applying a very gentle pressure if you're wanting to, treat raised cracks without it kind of having to apply weights and put the painting face down where the surface actually is too sensitive to tolerate that. So it means that we could do that treatment upright and target very localized areas of cracking.
Explain how that. So they're made with, so you buy the magnets, emagnets.com I think it is. So you can buy magnets of different strengths. You have to stick them to a little bit of, we've got foam core or a kind of archival board that you chamfer the edges of so that you haven't got a sharp edge, and then wrap them in Melanex or wrap them in sometimes in Tyvek or something, and then something non-sticky. So you can make them up yourself. You're very welcome to email us and we can explain more.
A follow-up question to that from Laura in the audience is, do you put the bonbons on both sides?
Very important to put them on both sides at the same time, yes.
Okay.
Otherwise they would just fall off.
Another question that's just popped through is a compliment to say it was an excellent talk, but would you be hosting another internship in the future? Definitely. Okay. And how will you be doing that? Is that through the Courtauld, or is it an open invitation?
No, it's absolutely open, and we welcome people, from all sorts of different courses. I don't know what's going to happen with Brexit. It might get more tricky, but we're really into it being something which is inclusive as much as possible and as wide as possible. Our main thing is that we really want people who are absolutely interested in contemporary and modern, because that's what we definitely specialise in. Mm-hmm. We are about to work together with a student from UCL who's doing, I think, archaeology or archaeological conservation. I know Lindsay did the same and then moved into modern and contemporary. So please don't feel like if you're not a specific paintings person or paintings conservator that you can't join in. Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly we do specialise more in paintings. We don't do time-based media or anything like that, so that might not be too relevant, but we absolutely want it to be inclusive and as wide as possible. So.
Oh, that's really useful, Julia, because a couple of questions have just come through about 3D contemporary works in your studio. Do you ever get sort of 3D works? Obviously, you've said not time-based media, which...
No, we would absolutely pass things like that on to Lindsay and Tessa, who I know are coming up later. So people that we we don't, I think it's very important with the modern and contemporary to understand where your limits also lie. So we are generally working with paintings. It's just that sometimes they aren't exclusively paintings, but it's really important that we respect other people's knowledge as well, and we don't overstep what we're able to do. I mean, you know, if people apply and it's not relevant to us, then we can hopefully help them find something that might be, etc. Okay. So.
One other question that's just come through is for you, Julia, do your clients want a full treatment report, and do they ask for sort of display and preventive advice?
They don't always ask for it, but they get it anyway. So some of the things, treatment reports, we have a copy that we keep on file here, and then a copy that we always send with our invoices. But we do also separate out a little bit. So what we do is we would give a list of all the materials that we've used on a painting, but we're very careful not to give recipes and instructions, which we have to be wary of, because there are people, a lot of technicians, for example, who are under pressure in galleries to do our jobs because they're employed and cheaper, essentially. So we do give out all of the information that's necessary, but we categorize it a little bit. We divide it up so that we're not providing a full recipe, but we keep on file everything that we've used and all of the techniques as well for the future. But yes, we also always the preventive care.
And I think we'll take this as the last question, is that from Natasha in the audience, is that you mentioned that research and mock-ups are a key part of treating modern and contemporary art. How easy is it to persuade private and commercial clients to pay for that?
I would never say, none of it is easy. I think that's a huge, but I'm not sure that that's easy in anybody's job. I think that's something that we share across institutions and private practice, isn't it? Battling for time and budgets for doing our job and all the testing time generally is something that I think I feel that's very strongly my job to try and fight for that. Yeah. So yeah, not easy, but worthwhile.
And I would definitely agree. I think it's a common problem in private and public. I would certainly say. Well, thank you both so much for your wonderful presentation and answering all the questions. I've been absolutely fascinated by magnetic bonbons. Not something I thought I would say this morning. So thank you so much. What I'd like to do now is just to introduce our next speaker, who is Hedwig Brahm. She's a conservator of modern and contemporary art, and she graduated from the University of Amsterdam in 2019, and she's currently working as a freelancer in the Netherlands. Now, this is our first of 2 pre-recorded sessions this morning, and her talk is looking at collaboration, and it's entitled Spider in a Web, interdisciplinary collaboration in contemporary art conservation. So hopefully this will just pop up on screen.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you all for being here and listening to my presentation. Unfortunately, I'm not able myself to be live to present this presentation to you, but I really hope that this pre-recorded version works just as well. So today I wanted to talk with other starting conservators about the importance of collaboration and asking for help and voicing your opinion among different stakeholders and taking a professional stand as the advocate of the artwork. I think this topic is especially relevant for us contemporary art conservators, because we are dealing with so many different materials, and of course it's impossible to be an expert in all of them. And also we are dealing often with a lot of different stakeholders, and sometimes even the artist when he or she is still alive. So I quickly will introduce myself to you so that you know who I am and who is talking to you. My name is Hedwig Brahm. I'm from the Netherlands, still live in the Netherlands. I obtained my master's degree in 2017 at the University of Amsterdam in contemporary art conservation. And in the 2 years after that, I worked as a conservator in training at different institutes as part of my postmaster degree. And I finished that in 2019. So since then, I've been working as a starting freelance conservator. In this presentation, I want to describe different kinds of interdisciplinary collaboration that I experienced when I was working as an intern at the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, Australia. I will illustrate this by a project that I worked on, which was Invocation of Washing Fire by Chen Zhen. This artwork was designed and proposed by the artist for the third Asia-Pacific Triennial in 1999, and it was constructed at the Queensland Art Gallery in a collaborative effort between the artist and museum staff, and also with locally sourced materials as well as with materials that the artist brought from China. The artwork is quite a complex installation. It consists of many different parts and also has a lot of different materials. So the base is this large square timber frame. And in the bottom of this, there are a lot of electrical wires and a variety of broken technological devices, as well as a string or several strings with about 60 incandescent light bulbs that give off a red light. And hanging from the frame are 24 Chinese chamber pots, and 8 of these have been altered to contain a speaker in their backs, playing an audio file with the sound of these chamber pots being washed in China. And then to each pot there is a metal structure which holds a wooden beam that goes through a metal cage with a Bacchus beads. You could see it on the previous slide. And on the side of the artwork is a large drum. Unfortunately, because of my limited time, I can't go into detail about all the different parts and all the different materials. And also not about I can't tell you about the meaning of the artwork, which is a bit of a shame because as it's normal for Chen Zhen's artworks, it is full of very beautiful symbolism. And the artwork was in quite a poor condition in 2019, and it really needed treatment before it could go on this long-term display. So there were several issues, such as the audio file that wasn't working, the electronics, but also the file itself. It used to be played from a cassette, and then it was, in the last exhibition, played from a DVD, which had quite poor sound quality, and also the track was way too short compared to the original track. A lot of the light bulbs weren't functioning, the metal cage had some constructional issues, but actually the main issue were the 24 barrels. Of course, because they used to be chamber pots, they used to be wet when they were in use, and now in the museum or in this artwork they are dry. And as a consequence, the wood has shrunk a lot, and this caused the metal hoops around them to come off, and the staves of the barrels came loose. And some barrels even fell down from the artwork. So this was the main issue that needed treatment, actually. So the types of collaboration that I want to discuss in this presentation are with different people, such as the artists, different specialists, conservators, those of other disciplines, but also supervising conservators, curators or head of collections, exhibition designers, installers, and of course visitors. And so in this presentation I will focus on collaboration that took place within a museum environment. And I will illustrate each of these collaborative efforts that took place with an example of the Chen Zhen. Okay, so first of all, to decide upon a treatment proposal, I wanted to involve the artist, of course, to determine the intent he had for the artwork in a sense of the material, but also the concept and the installation. Unfortunately, Chen Zhen passed away a year after the artwork was installed at the museum, so I couldn't ask him any questions. And instead I went into the archive of the museum and I read the documents that were made when the artwork was proposed to the museum and when it was installed by the artist and the museum staff. And this research gave me a lot of information on the specific wishes that the artist had for the artwork, in terms of the concept, but also the materials that were gathered for the artwork, and the way that it was installed, such as in what kind of space he wanted it to be installed, the interaction of the visitors with the artwork. He really wanted the visitors to interact with the drum on the side of the artwork to add to the volume of the audio file. Also the color of the red light bulbs and the volume of the audio. So that gave a lot of information about what he wanted. And of course, unfortunately, I couldn't involve him, but if the artist was still alive, I would definitely reach out to him and have an interview, or maybe even consider involvement of the artist in a conservation project. But unfortunately, that of course wasn't possible. However, I could speak to the museum staff that worked together with the artist in the creation of the artwork. So in 1999, the staff members that were working at the museum were involved in gathering materials for the artwork and also in putting it together. So I kind of low-key interviewed them about the role of the artist in this entire process, how much he was involved, how much freedom they had, how strong his opinion was, and also on what requirements they based their decisions to purchase specific materials. So these conversations shed some light on the fact that the artist outsourced something, such as purchasing the red light bulbs to some employees, and these people could give me information on how that took place. As I mentioned, the artwork was quite a complex piece that consisted of many different materials, and I wasn't experienced in all of the materials or specialized in them, so for some of those I asked the help of other specialists. One of these things was the electrical wiring of the artwork. The speakers in 8 of the barrels weren't functioning. So I asked Luke, who you can see pictured here, to have a look with me. Luke was a museum staff member who is an electrician. I don't believe he was involved in the making of the artwork in 1999, but luckily he could make sense of what he saw and determine what was wrong and why it wasn't functioning. So he very kindly helped me make a diagram of what we were dealing with. And in agreement with my supervisor, we decided to compromise part of the original wiring to update this to preserve the functioning and make sure that the audio was working again. Other aspects in which I involved other specialists for this artwork was the welding of the metal frame. The metal cage around the artwork was welded by professionals, and also the digitization of the audio. So these were things that I couldn't have done myself because I had no experience in them, and it was great that I could ask others to help me. I always made sure, where possible, to be involved in what they were doing, so I could learn from them as well. And so here you can see Wayne, another colleague of mine, who is an experienced welder and has a lot of knowledge of materials. And together with him, I had a look at all the metal hoops that came off the barrels that were severely corroded and falling apart to see how much they could withstand. And here he did some experiments with drilling very small holes in the metal hoops. So in this internship, I of course had a supervising conservator who worked alongside me. Actually, in a museum environment, there's often several conservators involved in a project, and they may all have a different opinion. I think in conservation, or at least for myself, I find myself often wanting to believe that there is one perfect solution for a conservation issue that I have to find and then apply and fix the issue. But this is almost never the case. There's often so many different treatment options that can be done, which can all be good and effective and have a good outcome. And I really experienced this in the treatment of the wooden barrels. So the wooden barrels that used to be chamber pots had shrunk, and they came apart, and the original metal hoops came off. And I discussed this with my colleagues, and there were a lot of different opinions. Some conservators were more practical and more hands-on. Others were a bit more hesitant to do something that was considered invasive. Some of them prioritized the appearance of the artwork, and others prioritized the original material. So there were a lot of ideas and arguments that I heard and collected, and I have to say that was quite a challenge for me as an intern. I found it pretty scary in the beginning to make my own decision, and having to convince others of this, believing in my own treatment. But it was really good, and it was a great lesson. It really forced me to think for myself, and also it was so good to learn how to deal with this. So my way was to have the conversation with different people involved, collect all their arguments and their ideas, and then decide upon my own treatment. That could be either something that someone suggested to me or that I came up with myself, and make my own argumentation very clear in this to discuss it with others. Because I never wanted to do a treatment that was based on the argumentation on someone else and that I didn't really believe in. So it was a really nice and good lesson. And for the barrels, I ended up doing quite a combination of ideas of myself and ideas that were proposed by others. So as a treatment, I came up with a combination of ideas that were offered to me by others and that I really agreed on, and some ideas of myself. For the inside, we decided to go with a pretty non-invasive treatment that consisted of a backing layer of Japanese paper strips that were attached with wheat starch, and they really held the wood together very well, and it was strong enough. And it was invisible from the outside. To reattach the metal hoops that became too big for the wood, we decided to drill small holes in the metal rings and nail them back to the barrels on their original location. So this was a bit more invasive, but very effective to preserve the original material in the artwork and have it structurally sound back on there. Also for this treatment, I worked together with conservators of other disciplines. So for the conservation or the treatment of the wooden barrels, I worked together with the wooden frames conservator of the museum. Related to working with your supervisor and other conservators is working with the curator and getting his or her approval for your treatment proposal, which is something that you might experience when you're a starting conservator. So one thing that I discovered that worked well during my internship was not to try and explain every single treatment option possible, because that was quite confusing for someone with a little less knowledge of the materials and treatment options. So instead, I focused on my main choice of treatment and asked for permission to demonstrate it. This was done either by making a dummy or doing a test treatment on a small area, or by treating only one of multiple objects. Sometimes the collaboration with the curator may involve convincing them of a measure or an intervention or a treatment. And an example of this is the replacement of the lights in the artwork. Several replacement lights were purchased to be demonstrated to the curator and to ask him of his opinion. Also, for the treatment of the barrels, it was proposed to do only the preferred treatment on one of the 24 barrels to be evaluated by the curator. By visually showing them the effect of a treatment, it's easier to get the approval for a treatment than by describing it to them with words. So as I mentioned earlier, the metal hoops that became too big for the barrels were reattached by drilling very small holes in the metal hoops and nailing them back in place. So when I first mentioned it to the curator, he wasn't very keen on this option because it sounded quite invasive. However, when I asked for permission to do one barrel as an example, he agreed. And when I showed him this result, he was actually very happy with it because it was by far less noticeable than he expected it to be. And so he was, after seeing this, he was convinced and let me do all the 23 others. Other times these things can result in more of a compromise. So for the Shenzhen, interaction with the visitors was such an aspect. Originally, the drum of the artwork was intended to be played by visitors, adding to the concept of the artwork and the invocation of washing fire. However, the curator did not want this interaction, out of fear that it would promote other interaction with the artwork by the visitors, such as touching other fragile materials or even climbing the artwork and hanging on the poles, etc. So a compromise that was established was that interaction with the drum by visitors was not encouraged, and museum guards would stop people if they would play the drum. But on the other hand, no stanchion would be placed around the artwork and no signs would be placed next to it that would explicitly forbid this, which was something that was done in the past and, in the opinion of the conservators of the museum, interfered quite a bit with the appearance of the artwork. The next person that I worked together with was the exhibition designer of the museum. So for the material aspect of the artwork, the conservator can be of help by providing the parameters for the exhibition that are part of preventive conservation. So for this, one can think of aspects such as temperature, light or humidity, distance of the viewers to the artwork, etc. And for my internship project, research into the exhibition of this artwork was also a part. So in doing research into the archive, I gained a lot of information about how this artwork should be installed according to the artist. And all of this information I could compile in an exhibition manual. And it included the parameters for the exhibition, such as the required space size, the lighting on the artwork, the volume of the audio, the intended interaction with the visitors, etc. However, often in large institutes, these types of installation manuals or exhibition manuals might be present, but not used effectively in the daily workflow. So exhibition designers or installation teams might not consult these documents, missing out on indispensable information for the best way of exhibition. So they might not even consult it before planning and designing an installation in a room, which can have consequences for doing justice to the intent of the artist, but also to the material of the artwork. So the conservator can really be of help here by pointing out these issues beforehand, attracting attention to these aspects, and enabling an optimal mode of exhibition. Lastly, collaboration with the installation team of the museum was very important. Although art handlers are of course trained to handle artworks with great care, there's often a risk that they do not know the artwork they are dealing with. And as a conservator with knowledge of a collection or a specific artwork, I believe it's our job to oversee the installation. Since you're already aware of the heavy parts and the fragile areas or the fragile paint layers or difficult constructions, I think it's extremely important when you can point out these aspects before others have to find them out themselves. This was especially useful for the complex installation of the Tianzhen. It consisted of a lot of different components that had to be installed in a specific order. Although it may feel useless at times to stand alongside an installation without actually doing the hard work or giving a hand, I think it's of tremendous importance that one person oversees the entire process and the entire team when doing an installation. And especially this is important if you can prevent any damage because of this, which would be such a shame if you just treated the artwork. Again, an installation manual can be of great help. This can include aspects such as the required time for the installation, the required hands, required equipment and materials that have to be present, any spare parts that should be present, the order of the installation, fragile areas that they have to be very careful with, where they best can lift the artwork, etc. So if you already know the artwork from treating it, it can just save a great deal of time to give a guideline and prevent others from having to find this out themselves. Again, making an installation instruction doesn't automatically mean that it will be implemented, so it's good to keep an eye out on whether or not it's being used in the installation and the workflow. Multidisciplinary collaboration is an inherent task of the contemporary art conservator that works in a museum environment. The broad range of materials the conservator has to deal with often requires specialized knowledge from others, such as conservators from other disciplines, artisans, technicians, and professionals from the industry. Besides the material scope, collaboration can also take place on the curatorial level, managing the expectations and the views from conservators, curators, and exhibition designers, for example. In the decision-making process, the conservator serves as a spider in the web, overseeing the process of all involved with their different interests. This may sometimes result in making compromises in the material or the conceptual preservation of the artwork or its exhibition. This can be a scary position for a starting conservator, but it's such an important position to be there and put the artwork and its needs central. I think for emerging conservators, one of the best things to keep in mind is the value and the usefulness of collaboration. Often we may think that we need to be able to do it all, know it all, and do it all by ourselves. But it's an amazing strength to know your limits and not be afraid to ask for help and learn from others. I want to thank you all very much for listening to my presentation. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If there's anything that you would like to tell me or ask me, don't hesitate to contact me at hettigbraam@gmail.com. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, what a fantastic presentation. And it's a real shame we don't have Hedwig here to be able to answer any questions. I know I have quite a few myself about that work. I thought it was really fascinating, and I think it was really interesting knowing that the artist wasn't alive, going back to those previous artist interviews and collaborations that had previously existed in the Queensland Contemporary Art Gallery to try and understand what was important about that artwork. And I think it was really interesting that she had learned that sort of lesson about the perfect solution, or the fact that there's many solutions to a problem. And I would love to have known more about the discussions between the various conservators. And I think that's something that's really interesting, is how we document those multiple voices and all those different collaborators when making choices and decisions when it comes to contemporary art. But if anyone does have any specific questions, as Hedwig said, please do follow up with her in terms of her email address, because I think that was just a really interesting case study. I'd like to in conservation at the University of Amsterdam, specialising in modern and contemporary art. And in Project Plastics, which was a project by the Foundation of the Preservation of Contemporary Art and the Netherlands Institute for Conservation Art and Science, she developed an online identification tool resulting in workshops that would enable art caretakers to identify plastics in their collection themselves. So next to her work as a project-based conservator at Tate, she also works freelance on a wide range of projects in both the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, and she has a London-based studio. So her talk this morning is going to be on a reflection of a plastic treatment. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you. Let me read. So I think, oh, that's one slide too far. So can everyone hear me well? Thank you for your kind introduction, Louise. Today I would like to present a treatment that I did during my studies in conservation within the modern and contemporary art discipline at the University of Amsterdam. My question around this talk is, would you do the same treatment again later in your career? During the second year of my master, 2 fellow students and I each got an artwork from the collection of the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, the RCE. The main focus of each object was light and plastic, and during the whole year our courses and workshops were also based around these themes. I got 2 almost identical wall lights, which are made by the Dutch designer Maria Hayes, vacuum lamp, translated as vacuum light. Maria Hayes already designed popular products during her education, which was under guidance of her teacher Gijs Bakker. Examples are the garden hose bracelets, and the magnifier and broach brush. Hayes graduated with the thread suitcase and the vacuum light. After her graduation, she focused on jewelry and got more interested in using natural materials. For example, this laminated birch necklace, which is part of MoMA's collection. The simplicity of her designs and showing the used materials has always remained an important aspect in her work. This simple design is also visible in vacuum lamp. It shows all the elements of a tube light that normally are hidden, which are the terminal block, the transformer, the starter, tube light, and all electrical wires. They are mounted on a perspex sheet over which different colors of transparent film can be placed. The films are vacuum formed to the shape of the electrical elements, hence the name. So why did these lights need treatment? Some of you might have noticed the damage on previous images. Here you can see detailed images of the plastic films. The image show examples of cracks and deformation caused by the cracks. Furthermore, there's a vertical crack in the perspex sheet. This crack also resulted in deformation of the electric wires. Here is a close-up image of the crack viewed from the top. But the worst is the burnt transparent film that resulted in deformation and discoloration. This is mainly visible over the transformer and the tube lights. This was also the case with the magenta film. So for the treatment, I had these main challenges. Dealing with the functional aspect of the work, it is designed as a functional wall light. The issues of heat development by the transformer and the tube light, and the tears that are present in the thin plastic. But I luckily had a whole year to tackle these aspects. Due to the close collaboration of the university with the RCE, I could use all the scientific techniques and tests that were available. To determine the type of plastic of the films, and mainly because of educational purposes, I performed the Beilstein test. This test can confirm when there is chlorine present in a polymer, which in this case would indicate that it is PVC. By melting the plastic sample to a copper wire, followed by burning it, a blue flame would appear when there is no chlorine present and a green when it is. In this case, you can see a very clear green flame, which means the PVC is made of the film is made of PVC. Suzanne de Groot from the RCE analyzed samples for 4 different films with FTIR analysis. The black graph is the magenta plastic film, and the blue graph shows a reference sample of PVC. And you can see that they're quite identical. An interesting method at hand was the Sharpless stress strain viewer. As the name already indicates, it visualizes the areas of stress in a plastic by viewing it under polarized light. The brightness of the color indicates the amount of stress. This is mainly present where the sharp lines are formed during the vacuum forming process. These areas are more likely to obtain damage, which was also the case for most of the films. A heat camera was used to measure the heat that is produced by the different elements. These images show clearly that the transformer and the ends of the tube light produce temperatures of more than 50 degrees. This is in line with the damage that we saw with the transparent film. This graph shows the heat development for each element. After 4,000 seconds, which is equivalent to 1 hour, the curve flattens, and when it's switched off, it takes about 3,000 seconds to cool down to reasonable temperature. This data can be used for deciding when to switch the artwork on and off again. A valuable part within modern and contemporary art conservation can be that the artist is still around. An interview is often an important source for information about the meaning of the artwork, the materials used, and the making process. This was also the case with Maria Hayes, who I visited together with Ellen Janssen. As seen in this image, Maria is holding the mold for the vacuum-formed films. This is the second version, since the first version got damaged when she started working together with a company to scale up the production. She also still has a whole stack of films. that were created during the second batch. For Maria, transparency is the most important part of the artwork. She suggests to replace the burned and deformed films since they are not transparent anymore. She therefore gave me 5 films to take home that I could use for the treatment of the light. She mentions that she has, until recently, lit the light in a hallway for almost 15 years, and she never encountered similar issues. However, later she sent an email showing that the transparent film was colored slightly yellow, but this was quite minimal to what we've seen here. So with all this gained information, I started selecting materials for the treatment. For cleaning of the plastics, I used the information from the pop art publication from 2012. These tables show the use of different cleaning systems like surfactants and solvents in combination with different cleaning methods. Looking at the colors, red indicating a bad cleaning and green a good cleaning, both tables indicate that cleaning the surface with solvents showed the best results. So for the PVC films, I selected 2 solvents and a surfactant dihyphon that are suggested by the pop art research. I tested them on dummies with different cleaning applications. I found that cleaning with the surfactant worked the best and decided to clear the surface with a solvent to gain a wider range in the cleaning effect. After obtaining advice from Anna Lagena, I decided, which is in contrast with the results from the pop art research, to clean the Perspex sheet with a demineralized water. I've tested several different adhesives that have a refractive index close to 1.49 of Perspex and are known not to yellow. Conlock, below, and the Norland adhesives are UV curing ones, which are very difficult to work with without a professional setup. Hextall and the Paralite mixture of B67 and F10 gave the best visual results. When I tested all the samples on strength, Hextall showed to be stronger. And since this Perspex sheet will need to carry the weight, it was decided to use this epoxy for adhering the sheet. Since you need to use an excess of the adhesive to make the joint as invisible as possible, I also performed tests on how to protect the surface of the Perspex sheet. From testing all these materials, museum wax worked the best. It also could easily be removed with white spirits, which is safe to use on Perspex. Cyclododecaine damaged the surface of Perspex quite badly, as you can see here in the top. In literature, there was not much known about adhering transparent PVC films. For selecting materials and the application methods, there were the following challenges. The adhesive needed to be as invisible as possible, strong enough to adhere a small surface area, and able to resist the developed heat of the elements of the light. On this image, you can see me testing the glass temperature, so that's the softening of the adhesive, on a hot plate. Mainly because of this last test, Hextall was chosen as the best candidate. The idea was to make use of capillarity to adhere the small surface area of the films. This method is widely used in glass and ceramic conservation, where the adhesive is pulled into the minuscule crack that is held together by tape. Unfortunately, due to the high surface tension, this did not happen. Nevertheless, it was decided to apply small droplets of the adhesive on the film, because no other known options were available. So that brings me to the stage of treatment. I was happy that I asked Anna Lagena for some final advice for adhering the Perspex, because otherwise I would have taken too little time for adhering. She also recommended to use Vaseline to protect the surface, and that I also should take enough time for the removal of the protective layer and excess of adhesive while it was still soft. After protecting the top and the bottom surface of the sheet with Vaseline, I applied adhesive with a brush, clamped it and got rid of the air bubbles by scratching excess of adhesive. After 24 hours, I removed the protective layer and excess with Shelcel D40. I left the adhesive to set and dry for 7 days. The films were also adhered with Hextall, of which some I was able to clamp, some were just left in the state they were, since the two ends could not be brought closer to each other. In the image on the right, you can see that I also used Vaseline to protect the surface of the PVC films. Now, I must say that it's mainly because of the replacement film that I could achieve such a big difference from before and after treatments. Here there's also an example of the magenta film. But I would like to discuss one thing. Would you do it again? Because I still regret to this day that I followed literature for cleaning of the PVC films without asking experts for more advice. Today, especially having gained so much more knowledge about plastics, I would never clean PVC or any other plastic with a polysolvent or perform a treatment with a solvent-based adhesive. So for the cleaning part of the treatment of the PVC films with a polysolvent, I would say, no, I would not do that again. I was also not happy with the result of adhering of this big crack. In the image, you can see the protective layer, the applied adhesive, and some weights to keep the film level. But in my opinion, I used too much adhesive. I'm still grateful for the support of my teachers. They told me that I performed the treatment with the best available knowledge. There was at that time no better result or solution that would fit all the requirements. Now I look back at the images before and after, it doesn't seem to look that bad. Nevertheless, I'm still searching for a better solution. So please share your ideas with me. To conclude, I would like to say, please don't hesitate to ask someone's advice when you do a treatment that is new for you. We're all here to protect our cultural heritage, and that's something that we cannot do only from books. I want to thank the following people and all of you for listening.
Thank you. That was a really great talk, and it was really lovely to see the sort of reflection, asking yourself whether you would do that again. I'm just waiting to see whether we've got any questions coming through. Let me just check. Okay. We've got a question. Would you use a solvent-based gelling system for cleaning PVC?
Ooh, that's actually a good question. I've never tried that, but I think it's really worthwhile to investigate and see what the effects are, like mainly long term, because that's the danger with plastics that, for example, you can clean it at this time with a solvent, but you won't see any damage. But then later on, you can, for example, that's like very typical for perspex, that later on you can see the like a grazing pattern in this, like arising in the surface.
Another question's just come in. Were you able to determine why the clear PVC sheet had reacted so badly, and when the artist's PVC sheet had not responded in that way at all? Were you able to determine that?
So yeah, there were like several ideas behind it. I didn't have a clear answer to that, but one thought was that she had it in a hallway where there was more of an airflow, so there's more of like a cooling down of the air. Or she used like different elements, like electric elements on that sheet. So maybe that's the case. Or that she also just switched it on like in the evening and not like for a whole day. What probably happened with at the RCE.
Mm-hmm. So another question has just come in from Libby. How are you clearing the Vaseline and excess adhesive? When she's been looking at adhering PMMA, she was hesitant to use a barrier to avoid having to clear it as well as the adhesive. So would you still use a barrier layer on something like this? So I guess there's two questions there.
Yeah, so I cleaned it with a cotton swab and shell sole, and I must say it was quite annoying to do, because you also have to be careful that you don't bring in the solvent into the crack. So you remove the adhesive that you actually want to use to adhere the two parts. But if you just do it very carefully, it just takes a lot of time. That's for sure.
I think that's the last of our questionnaire. I don't know. I just want to put it out if anyone has any questions about anything that they've heard this morning. I'll just give a moment for that to come through. I mean, I think we've had a really broad range of talks, and I would just like to extend my thanks to all of our speakers. I'm very relieved that we had very few technical difficulties, and obviously we have a session tomorrow and we have a session on Friday. Sorry, we've just got another question that's just popped in. So Karen, did you use the same plastic, PVC, for the new covers, or did you consider using a different type of plastic?
I used the films that Maria Hayes produced in 1979, and she kind of like gave them to me for the treatment. So they were like almost the same. She was always she sourced her materials always from one factory. You never know if it's like exactly the same PVC or the formula. But in general, yes, I used the same materials. And what I also did, I put some small rings in between the Perspex sheet and the PVC to create a bit more air, like more of a gap, that the elements weren't that close to the film. And also as a recommendation, I was like, you can only lit the light for 50 minutes and then it needs to cool down for 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Given that the artist gave you sort of the new covers, have you thought about what the options are for treating this work in the future when the artist is no longer around? That's a question from Alice.
Good question. So when I also visited Maria Hayes, I was just so happy when I saw that she had the like original light, the original mold of the light. So I probably would try to find where she left that, and if no one kind of chucked that away. And otherwise, indeed, like think about making such a mold and then indeed producing new films and have them as like a replica, because yeah, she really mentioned that the transparency of the films and also seeing all the elements of the light are like very important for the work.
That's great. Does anybody have any final questions in terms of for Alice or Julia? If not, then I will draw our very first session to a close slightly early, but that's okay. And I hope that, because at the moment we have 110 participants, that many of you will join us for tomorrow. Our lineup tomorrow is a great session. We have speakers from private practice in terms of 3D and sculpture. We have some talks on time-based media, documentation, and we're also hoping to have a discussion tomorrow as well. So can I just thank everyone for taking the time to join us. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear from our speakers and for you all to join us today. Okay, thank you.